The number of opioid overdoses and deaths in Missouri increased in 2020 compared to 2019.
And Lucas, data that I got my hands on show the opioid epidemic only got worse during the pandemic. So take a look. 788 people died in 2019 from January to September from an opioid-related overdose in Missouri. And then in 2020, during that same time period, that number jumped to 1,034. That's a nearly 31% increase. And this ABC 17 News investigates. I spoke to a mother who doesn't want to see this increasing trend continue.
Yes, this is my son. His name was Adam, and this is his son, Ryan.
The story of Cindy Tandy's son is one she never wants another family to live through.
If I can help anyone not have to lose their child, I'll do whatever it takes, because it hurts.
Adam Paulson was 36 when he passed away from a heroin overdose in 2019.
He did come to me about 3 weeks before he passed and asked me about he needed help. And I told him to call around and find out, but he couldn't get in any places. So in the meantime, unfortunately, he died.
That storyline is something Greg Smith, the executive director of Missouri Coalition of Recovery Support, sees all too often.
There's a lot of people who have passed away because they couldn't get into services.
And the pandemic isn't helping with the opioid problem that already plagued Missouri.
During the pandemic, you saw people in isolation. You saw a lot of anxiety, depression. All of that stuff kind of leads to issues with drug addiction.
While the number of opioid deaths increased, so did the amount of times first responders used the life-saving drug Narcan. Data I got through a records request show Columbia Police more than doubled the times it used Narcan in 2020 compared to 2019.
This should be a major turning point in your life. Here we are in the hospital. You were gone, and now you're back, and let this be, if you were looking for a wake-up call, this is it.
Sergeant Dallas Dolan says the increased use of Narcan in 2020 could have several contributing factors. Those include more officers trained to recognize someone needing it and more people using substances to help cope in the midst of the pandemic. And data proves that. In 2019, the Columbia Police Department received 193 calls for someone overdosing. In 2020, that number jumped to 262, a nearly 35% increase in calls for help. But once they get the initial help, the road to treatment and recovery might be harder to come by.
Do you still think there's a lot more that we need to have in Missouri?
There's always more that needs to be done. So there's so many people each year that need treatment that can't get into treatment.
Right now, 1,250 beds are spread out across 132 accredited recovery homes in Missouri. Smith told me he hopes to see 2,000 beds and 200 homes by the end of next year. And hopefully, the addition of federal grants will help with that. Missouri was awarded $25 million last summer to help in the fight. Some of that money has gone to increase access to treatment and prevention programs. Smith told me this is encouraging, but it's not going to happen overnight.
We are getting resources, but it takes time to ramp up services.
What would you have to say to maybe a person that's watching this that is going through an opioid, addiction right now? Yeah. What would you have to tell them?
Get help. Get help. Because you're worth more than that. You're worth more than that, and there is help.
I called around to several mid-Missouri recovery houses to see how many available beds there are. If you or you know someone who needs help, I have a list of those on our website at abc17news.com.